All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to our Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force meeting for Tuesday, December the 14th, 2021. I am co-chair Commissioner Walter Clark alongside co-chair Commissioner Tim Sargent. Actually, we're in separate places today. So I'm going to read here to conduct this meeting wholly and electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance by the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the task force is participating in this meeting from separate locations, we must verify that a form of membership participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask that each task force member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. Commissioner Tim Sargent.
Tim Sargent here, participating from his home in the Mount Vernon District.
Catherine Ward. Gretchen Waltz. Tracy Wood. Mary Payton.
Yeah, this is Mary Payton from my home in Mount Vernon District.
Hamid Munir. Hillary Clausen.
This is Hillary Clausen from my home in Mason Neck.
David Levine.
This is David Levine, and I am calling from a mountaintop in Park City, Utah.
Whoa.
Awesome.
All right.
Evan Kaufman. Ellen Young.
Yes, this is Ellen Young here from home in Bellevue.
Fantastic. At this point, I will pass a virtual gavel over to co-chairman Tim Sargent so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion. I move that each member voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the Mount Vernon District SSPA Task Force. I so move.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Is that Ellen?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
And let me also state from the record, Walter Clark, I am calling in from my home in Alexandria, Virginia, Mount Vernon District. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels this emergency procedure. The fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for the public to access this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the task force to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the task force and physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the task force may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated video and audio conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by registering through the meeting link on the Track a Plan Amendment page of SSPA website at www.fairfaxcounty.gov/planning-development/plan-amendments SSPA/South/track-plan-amendment, or by
Walter?
calling 1-844-621-3956 and entering access code. It is so moved.
Walter, I just, sorry to interrupt. I think we are short one person for a quorum.
You want me to read all this over again?
Unless there's someone on an 800 number calling in. I don't know who that is, but.
Can you hear me? This is Evan.
Evan, okay.
Oh, Evan. All right. Save the day. Welcome, Evan.
Much move, Evan.
Thank you.
And where are you calling from, Evan?
I'm calling from Lorton, Virginia.
Whoa. Okay. Not necessarily on a mountaintop.
Close to Pohick Bay Mountain.
Okay.
Small mountain.
Okay. So Tim, I moved a motion.
All right. Do I hear a second to that motion?
I second. This is Hillary.
Hillary seconds. Thank you very much. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
Finally, it is next required that all other matters addressed on today's agenda must address the emergency itself and necessary for the continuity in Fairfax County government, and or statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of the Mount Vernon District SSPA task forces, lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. I so move.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Was that Mary?
Yeah.
Okay, seconded by Mary Payton. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Sargent. And we have our agenda for tonight. And I know it's been a little while since we've all met and we've been together. So thank you for those that are able to join tonight. Before we start with the agenda, I would ask Aaron if we've had any public comments or emails since our last meeting that needs to be addressed before we start the agenda.
No public comments.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have one item on the agenda, which is the Huntington Metro Station. And Graham will go over some items there, and then we have a presentation from Mr. Neil Teague, and we have 10 minutes of public comments or so, and then we have closing comments after that. So we should be adjourning somewhere around 8:30, and we appreciate everyone's time tonight. So I'll turn it over to Graham.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Clark. And first of all, just want to say hello to everybody. It has been a little while since we met last. I think it was in late October that we met and discussed the transportation analysis that we're performing for the Huntington Metro Station. So glad to see everybody's face in the Hollywood Squares again. Different platform, but we're at it again. So I appreciate those that were able to join tonight. So we're hoping to do two things in general this evening regarding Huntington Metro. We've had a couple of discussions with the task force regarding land use in the past and connectivity, and as well as the potential impacts of the nomination and the plan amendment. And what we're hoping to do is today is kind of make this a bridge basically between some of the transit-oriented development policies that we've reviewed that are kind of conceptual, that they're a component of the policy plan and the comprehensive plan, and start to look at the outstanding items as they relate to the Huntington Metro Station. So my presentation that I've prepared is, I think of it as a bridge between a policy discussion to what should we be looking at the Huntington Metro Station. So I don't have plan text or anything along those lines at this point, but this is building up towards a potential discussion later on in 2022 when we will be discussing what we call the straw man or draft plan text. So what we're hoping to do is bridge the gap between policy and the application of that policy to this specific site. So I'm hoping to be able to have a dialogue with the task force regarding that bridge and the kinds of things that we think are outstanding in terms of the things that the task force wants to see as this is reviewed. The second is WMATA has brought their architect team on this call, and so I think they're going to be able to walk us through some of the concepts that they've put forward that look at how the site could be arranged for a redevelopment. So this is kind of my part of it is the bridge between TOD policy and the application of it to the site, and they will be looking at the constraints and the opportunities that present themselves with the redevelopment. So before we do that, any questions kind of right up front? I think my presentation will probably take about half of the time, and theirs will take about half the time as well. So you'll be able to hear from both teams, so to speak. All right. Well, I will get to it then. So just 1 second. One of the features of Teams is I don't have to request permission to share my screen, so it will be a little bit easier to go on this time around. So just bear with me 1 second. All right, so let's see here. Are you able to see my screen with the main presentation pulled up?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. All right. So I'm building this land use outstanding items. So we've focused on a number of aspects of TOD policy and land use considerations in the past, and these are the 4 main themes that we're hoping to discuss tonight. So land use mix in transit-oriented development. So looking at what are some typical and kind of best practices for looking at different types of mixes within a mixed-use project in a transit-oriented development area. Another huge component of that is retail and how the ground floor in a mixed-use development can be active and can add to the vibrancy of an area. The third is the phasing of development, recognizing that this development is intended to be phased. A lot of transit-oriented development projects are phased. And so what are some considerations that we should take a look at as from a plan standpoint for the phasing language? And finally, we'll discuss building heights as they relate to both the site and the immediate surrounding area, how that informs and influences development pattern and open space considerations. So transit station areas, y'all are familiar with transit station areas. We have several of them throughout the county surrounding the metro stations. So those are the areas that are most influenced by metro. And the goal in these areas is to encourage mixed use, compact, pedestrian friendly urban forms within walking distance of the station. So that's generally speaking about a quarter-mile distance or a 5 to 10 minute walk, depending on the location. So these are areas that are directly influenced by the presence of metro. And they promote a land use pattern that supports metro by encouraging a mix of uses in a compact, pedestrian-friendly urban form within walking distance. So metro, as you all know, provides a vital public transportation choice that really enhances accessibility, reduces the reliance on single occupancy vehicles, and it's also really one of these things that we're hoping to boost in terms of ensuring that we have density in these locations to support metro operations and provide choices throughout the county. So looking at, here's a county map showing our concept for future development, which is kind of the embodiment of our policy plan and the comprehensive plan and how it influences the area plans. So a couple of TSAs that I wanted to highlight as examples of successful TOD are the following. So looking at the Dunn-Loring Metro Station, that's the area kind of at the northern edge of the Merryfield suburban center. If you know that area, it's one of the more successful examples of TOD in the county. The other is the Vienna Metro Station. It's a more residential heavy development at this point, but it is in the comprehensive plan envisioned to be a mixed use development. The third will be the Wheelie Reston East. It should say Reston. It says Rest, but it should say Reston, as you all know. Wheelie Reston East. transit station area. That's the area surrounding Wheelie Station. Most of y'all have been up there, I'm sure, and know the Google building, the Comstock building. It's a kind of a landmark in the Wheelie area. And then finally, we'll also talk about Huntington. So I think the question to ask, when we're looking at this is what's an appropriate mix of land uses around Metro Station? So best practices, from a couple of Huntington TSA locations and others kind of help to get at that specific answer. In general, what we're looking at in all of our TSAs is having some sort of a balance between residential and non-residential uses. How that takes shape and how that takes form, what the exact mix is, depends on the site considerations and the area of interest. There are, among all of the examples that we're going to go through, specific considerations for ground floor uses, retail, support services, those kinds of things. And then most of them, if not all of them, have specific considerations for the arrangement of open space in an urban context. So looking at, so those are some of the best practices at the very highest of levels. One thing that I would just reiterate is what we've been asked to study, what the board has asked the task force to study, which is the consideration of up to 1,500 net new residential units on the WMATA site, and then 95,000 square feet of net new non-residential uses. So this is looking at both office and retail. One way of looking at that, if you look at kind of proportionally how that might break down across non-residential uses, is looking at about 39,000 square feet of retail. And I think that this number is slightly off, so forgive me for this, but a larger amount of net new office space. And then the form is actually set in the authorization. The total heights are set in the authorization of buildings at 55 to 200 feet in total height. I should say feet, so excuse me for that error as well. A couple of examples regarding Huntington TSA. So right now, as you are aware, the Huntington Metro site contains an existing redevelopment option, which has been implemented on the residential end. So that's looking at land units E and F, where you have a 75% residential split, 25% non-residential, assuming that you have about a 1,000 square foot average unit size. So that's about a 75 to 25 split in terms of the adopted plans recommendation. Another example, Huntington Club, which is immediately adjacent to the WMATA site, that land unit looks at about an 80 to 20% residential to non-residential split. Huntington Station, which is immediately across North Kings Highway from this specific site, land unit L, as it's called, Huntington Station Shopping Center, that's about an 86% to 14% residential to non-residential split. And then another mix of uses that y'all are familiar with because you reviewed it earlier this year is the Parker. And that, instead of looking at a specific split in terms of residential versus non-residential, one of the things that was adopted by the board was looking at allowing for additional increased residential use on the portion of the Parker that hasn't been constructed yet, but ensuring that we have ground floor and secondary potential secondary non-residential uses on the second floor of the new area. So there's a lot of ways that even in Huntington, this has been embodied. I think the main takeaway is that with all of these examples, you have some mixture of residential and non-residential uses to ensure that you have some activity during the day, some activity at night, so that you're getting that kind of critical mass of people there to allow for a pedestrian-friendly environment. Here's another example. So some of y'all may be familiar with this. This is the Dunn Lowering Station. So again, the northern end of the Merryfield Suburban Center. The anchor tenant in this residential heavy development is the Harris Teeter, which is about 46,000 square feet of total development. But this is immediately adjacent to the Metro Station. So the Merryfield area-wide guidance, in terms of what it has to say about land use mix, the area-wide guidance indicates that retail and service uses should range from about 5% to 30% of the development's total square footage. The PRM zoning of the site, so when the site was rezoned, allowing for the redevelopment surrounding the Metro Station, looked at about 550 to 720 multifamily units and about 80,000 to 108,000 square feet of retail and secondary uses. So this is in line with the Merryfield Land Unit 8 guidance. So this is the comp plan guidance. that called for a residential anchored redevelopment with retail and service uses on the ground floor. I think that the real takeaway here is that in both cases, for both the residential use and for the ground floor use, you have this range, kind of a minimum amount that seemed to be appropriate for a TOD area, as well as a maximum, so that you had this real understanding of what, are you implementing the vision of TOD as expressed in both the comp plan's guidance for the area as well as for the TOD guidelines. I would note that the WMATA from this image, as you can see, you have retail that's fronting the garage, fairly large garage that you can see from I-66, for example. On one side, and this runs down Avenir Place, which is kind of the main drag or the main street that's immediately adjacent to WMATA. So the entrance to the metro is kind of behind this image. So all this activity is packed into a fairly dense area and is making for a pretty successful project. The next is the Vienna Station. So as I mentioned, this is a little bit further down the orange line, just the next station down from the Dunboring station. This is a phased development. Most of the initial phase has been built out, which is mostly a collection of townhouses, 2/2s or stacked townhouses, and some mid-rise products, but fairly residential in terms of its total mix at this point. I think the important takeaway here with the plan guidance for the Vienna Station, a couple of images that I'll explain in a second, is that the concept really tries to focus density and intensity within that quarter-mile radius at the southern end of the station, which they call the core area. So under the comprehensive plan's recommendations for this area, you have ground floor retail and service uses that are in the plan, and those are supposed to be fronting along the town center, which is that central point that you see in that top image, as well as the main street. And the main street is that area that extends north and goes directly to the metro station. So all in all, across the whole of this land unit's recommendation, which is TOD in nature, 2,250 residential units, fairly similar in some ways to our site in terms of the total amount of residential units across the land unit. In addition to the 2250, you also have a range of non-residential uses. So looking at 125,000 to 300,000 square feet of office use. And then this is another example where you have a minimum square footage of retail, service and institutional uses, 100,000 square feet, inclusive of a 15,000 square foot grocery store. So we've got a couple of images here. This, the image on the top shows the adopted plans concept for pathways and connections. So as I mentioned, the quarter-mile radius is this area it's in the circle. And then you have the smaller area at the dead center, which is the town center, with the main street connecting to Metro. This was refined, of course, and further illustrated with the rezoning application, what we call Metro West, or the Pulte rezoning. So you started to see, as a part of the rezoning application, the illustration of this concept with the rezoning, where you start to see the mid-rise products as well as the retail fronting along the town center. Wheelie, Reston East. So as I mentioned, this is the Comstock Development. It's a board-owned but ground-leased site to Comstock, where there's been a very successful example of TOD. This image shows a series of buildings. There's 6 buildings on this specific site. The rezoning that accompanied this also included 2 other buildings. They're a bit further down the line. But this is surrounding the Wheelie Reston East Station along the Silver Line, located at Wheelie Avenue and Sunset Hills Boulevard, directly adjacent to the Dulles Toll Road. So at the time that this project was entitled, over the next slide, at the time that this project was entitled, the comprehensive plan recommended a mix of uses, 40% to 75% residential, and then a 25% to 60% non-residential mix. Ground floor retail and support service users were very much encouraged to add to the vibrancy and enhance the pedestrian environment for this area, not just on the ground floors that are facing the street, but also in a central plaza, which is the image that I've got right here, that we're showing right here. And then this concept was further illustrated through the rezoning application that implemented this plan option, and where you had this proffered land use mix that included ranges for each building, with about 2 to 6%, depending on the building, of the total building's square footage dedicated to ground floor retail, either at the street level or in that plaza that I mentioned. So within each building, about 5,000 to 15,000 square feet. This is not
Excuse
a
me,
Fairfax.
Excuse me, Grant.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. One second. Hey, Aaron, can you resend the link to Catherine Ward? She's trying to get in and it won't let her in.
Yes, I'll do that.
So-
Thank you.
Sorry, Grant.
No worries. This is another example that's not Fairfax, but it's very close by. So as the crow flies, very close by, just to the north, across Cameron Run in Eisenhower in Alexandria. So as I think Joanne had discussed some of the elements of the Eisenhower East plan, but this is a recently adopted update to the area plan for Eisenhower East, which is immediately across Cameron Run, as I mentioned, from the Huntington area. One of the hallmarks of this specific plan was an update with regards to flexibility with regards to primary uses. So this area that you have right here, this is Hoffman Street. Immediately just behind this tree, you'll see the Hoffman Center. Some of y'all may have gone there to see movies, to great cinema. But this is one of the specific areas that's been outlined for ground floor activated uses. So couple of here's the illustration of the concept plan for Eisenhower East, which is TOD in nature. It has the Eisenhower East Metro Station immediately to the south of the retail focus area. But while they have a lot of they do have a lot of flexibility with regards to primary uses. So this enabled, if you have a more non-residential project in one area or more residential project in another, there's more flexibility built into this plan to be able to enable primary uses. But with a real focus in specific areas on retail and ensuring that you have that clustering of retail that really allows people to go out and enjoy themselves, go shopping, and really have a sense of place as they do it. So looking very specifically at two locations, so Hoffman Street and another area in what they call Neighborhood 2. It's really kind of trying to concentrate and get that critical mass of retail in some specific locations. This is as opposed to just requiring retail on every block or on every block face. Really thinking critically about where is it that retail can be successful. Another bit further flung example of mixed use and some I think pretty interesting information to our neighbor to the north across the river. Montgomery County. So they recently completed a mixed-use development study that looked at mixed-use projects that have been delivered in the county since 2010, from 2010 to 2020. Within that time frame, they've seen about 17.8 million square feet of mixed-use development. So they've been very successful in terms of delivering these kinds of projects. They also currently have 16.6 million square feet of mixed-use development in their pipeline. So they've got a lot that they've seen delivered to date, and they're still see quite a lot of it, especially in the Downey County area. A couple of examples from their study, which I've included a link here for anybody that wants to take a look at it. I'm happy to drop it in the chat too, because it's a fascinating read. But they've really looked at what are some of the key hallmarks of successful projects, and there's some pretty interesting perspectives on how to do mixed use right. One of the typologies that they've really kind of dialed in on are those that are within a half mile of rail, and those that are not, because they do see some differences in terms of success, as well as different characteristics pertinent to those that are within that half mile and those that are not. But a couple of examples regarding land use mix. So within that half mile of rail stations in Montgomery County, projects that are low to mid-rise in nature, so they count those as anywhere from 1 story all the way up to 14 stories for low to mid-rise. Residentially anchored projects, on average, they have about 9% of their total gross floor area as ground floor retail. Another example, high-rise developments, those are 15, in their estimation, 15 stories and more that are residentially anchored. About 7% of the ground floor area is dedicated to 7% of the total area is dedicated to ground floor retail. Office anchored projects, so those that are, office development with some ground floor retail, you do get lower percentages, from 4 to 5%. And then hotel anchored projects, about 3% of the total ground floor of the total building's square footage is dedicated to ground floor retail. So very interesting read. There's a lot of good takeaways that I encourage anybody that's interested in to take a look at that study. It was pretty illustrative of how successful they've been and how they might make a couple of tweaks to their policies to keep things going. So a couple of additional thoughts on retail and ground floor uses. So one of the things that I've been talking about is the importance of having a land use mix that allows for a ground floor that's active, that's vibrant, and that allows for people to come to locations where mixed use is being constructed. Think of it as a destination. So one of the questions that we're encountering is what type of retail is in demand in this area. So as y'all remember, the EDA commissioned a market analysis based in 2019 numbers, and they saw that from at the current time that they were doing the study, retail demand exceeded sales in the North Gateway, Huntington, and Pendaw trade area. That's the area that they looked at in terms of the total trade area for retail for a number of types of uses. So neighborhood goods and services, so that's food and beverage stores, grocery stores, health and personal care, drinking places, and then merchandise stores, a variety of types, so clothes, electronics, sporting goods, etc. One question is, how much demand will there be in the future? So there's demand today for certain types of segments of retail, but how much demand is there going to be in the future? So the EDA projects that anywhere from about 44 to 51,000 square feet projected retail demand for the Huntington and North Gateway trade area. So that's not including Pendaw through 2030. So one thing to note is that the EDA market analysis was looking at some pipeline development. So they projected, their projections included the Huntington Club, for example, but it did not include any of the pending or recently adopted plan amendments. So this proposal, for example, or the Parkers, which will add residential units as well as office in the future. And so those increases in terms of demand generated by those residential units and the office workers will increase the need for retail to provide services for those folks. I would also note the time frame that's attached to this analysis was through 2030, which is approximately the same time frame as the build out of the southern precinct of the WMATA site, which the WMATA team will describe in their presentation. So looking at how much demand will there be in the future, there will be demand. About the maximum estimate currently is 51,000 square feet, but that does not include the units that are included with either of those two plan amendments. Where can new retail go is one question, fairly straightforward one, because looking at the aggregate, both the North Gateway CBC and the Huntington TSAs, which are the areas that more or less coincide with the trade area, they contain more than adequate development potential to capture any new demand. So we don't have a problem in that sense. We've planned accordingly to allow for new retail as well as new residential to support that retail to build and to go into certain locations from a planning standpoint. Kind of a separate question, but an important one, is where should new retail go? And the EDA did weigh in on this. They indicated that future new retail construction should be focused on redevelopment of existing obsolete or vacant retail space, or at high intensity development sites, and very specifically noted that the Huntington Metro Station is actually the only site that they called out within the Huntington trade area as a site for new retail. Another instance of or another way of looking at where should retail go. The adopted plan for the Huntington Station also specifically says that it should be located along main pedestrian routes. So that kind of gives you a perspective that retail should be included with the Huntington Metro Station, and specifically looking at places where pedestrians can walk by and can enjoy the retail experience. A couple of example tenant spaces. So talking about square footages I don't think that we have a solid number yet in terms of how much demand there will be, considering the increases. I think we'll want to take a look at that. But a couple of things to kind of note in terms of what sizes are we looking at in terms of lease areas for specific businesses. So I've listed a couple here as examples of what size can you expect for a specific type of use. So the Lidl that's going in Pendog, a bit further down North Kings Highway, is going to be about 20,000 square feet of leasable floor area, and then they have about 8,000 to 10,000 square feet in the back of the house. Those of you that are familiar with the Mosaic District might know this one. Mom's Market, another small-ish grocery store, is 12,000 square feet. Trader Joe's in Clarendon, it's about 10,000 square feet. So that kind of gives you a perspective that we're not dealing with like a 45,000 square foot Safeway, on this site, for example. But there may be opportunities for looking at something that's a bit smaller in nature, something that's more convenience neighborhood sized. A couple of other examples that you may be familiar with: the Caboose Brewing Company at Mosaic, 6,800 square feet. The Warby Parker in Merryfield, 1,800 square feet. Bellevue Shopping Center, the Primo Restaurant, is about 4,000 square feet. Spokes, etc. at Bellevue is 3,300 square feet. Bonchon, which is the Beacon at Groveton, 2,600 square feet. And then finally, Iron Chef Sushi, just a good restaurant in Merryfield, 1,800 square feet. So when we're looking at what are we dealing with in terms of ground floor uses? Those are kind of some good rules of thumb to follow, so that you're understanding kind of what ground floor could be on these sites. All right, so dialing in for Huntington Station specifically, we've had a consultant, Dover Cole, that's assisted us with examining the pedestrian network on and surrounding the station. This is one of the many images that they've produced showing the potential pedestrian network for the area, accounting for WMATA's concept plans, especially their block pattern, as well as the recently entitled Huntington Club redevelopment, as well as the Avonton proposal, which is under construction, Huntington Crossing, which is under construction, et cetera. So really kind of accounting for all the development activity that's going on in this area. We're going to focus on connectivity at a future meeting, most likely at our January meeting. So I don't want to belabor or talk too much about connectivity specifically tonight, because we are going to be discussing that as part of our discussion of the whole of the TSA-wide active transportation planning effort. But I do want to bring up this image now as we discuss the appropriate locations for retail on this site. So just to kind of orient you, everything is flipped 90 degrees to the east. So north in this case is located to the right, and south is to the left. So a couple of items here. The red lines represent both either entitled or existing pedestrian walkways, sidewalks, etc. The bold line in pink that runs through the center of the site is a potential main pedestrian connection route that brings people from the bottom of Huntington, so looking at all the way down to the Cameron Run Creek Trail, through the Huntington Metro site and the adjacent Huntington Club, and then up to the top, so up to the Mount Eagle Park. So that's just one of the main pedestrian routes. It's not the only one. It's just one of the ways that we could orient ourselves and get from north to south, so to speak. So this is illustrative in terms of showing, where are people going to go? They're obviously going to go to the two station entrances, but there's a lot of connections, both within the site and then to the surrounding area. So when you consider the approaches taken, at other successful examples of TOD in Fairfax and the surrounding jurisdictions, I think a couple of commonalities emerge. The first is the importance of providing ground floor uses along main pedestrian pathways. Another is concentrating retail to get kind of a main street feel where people can shop, enjoy what the district has to offer, linger, really enjoy themselves. So such areas often include central plazas, kind of as an organizing elements or meetup areas, places where people can relax, enjoy themselves, and experience what the district has. And so putting these together on the site I think that it's intuitive that a lot of pedestrians will pass along many of the sides, outlined here in the southern precinct, especially surrounding the S2 building. So this is one of the areas that could very well be, a block that can take advantage of the pedestrian traffic by having on a number of sides, not just North Kings Highway, but potentially on some of these side streets and internal streets adjacent to the Kiss and Ride, and could be a fantastic location for ground floor retail and service uses. I think one of the questions that we have is for the task force is, where should retail go in terms of the main pedestrian routes? So there's some advantages to the North Kings Highway side. There's some advantages to looking at specifically the corner treatments. And then there's advantages to the side streets. You might be able to get like facing like on some of the blocks, for example, where you have, retail on either side of the block. Might be able to create more of a Main Street type of feel. Another place where retail could be appropriate is, along the back edge facing the Kiss and Ride in the park. That's an area that will be able to take advantage of the tremendous views that are at the top of the park. So there could be a lot of fantastic locations for retail in this area. Looking at the northern end, one of the things that's kind of the hallmark of the Huntington Club proposal has been the ground floor retail experience along Huntington Avenue. So, and the Parker as well, having the ability to have ground floor retail on Huntington Avenue with the Parker's redevelopment is also a positive element in terms of having a district feel with a district Main Street. And so continuing that successful pattern could be one approach where you either look at the edges or look at specifically the frontage along Huntington Avenue for additional retail in that northern phase, which is, as we know, further afield, but could be a fantastic location as well. One other last thing about retail. The EDA analysis was only looking at some specific types of retail, so neighborhood goods, services, food and beverage services, and general merchandise. So they did not include in their analysis any sort of retail, projections regarding non-retail ground floor uses, so things that we might consider to be support services or service-oriented businesses. So community centers, medical office, dentist office, fitness centers, co-working spaces, a couple of other examples, dry cleaners, health clubs, professional storefront offices, and institutional uses. These kinds of things were not considered as a part of the retail demand, but they certainly are aspects of, successful, can be examples of a successful mixed-use project that we would not want to ignore and would want to encourage in appropriate locations on the site. So in conclusion, the main takeaway that I have in looking at this is that it's really imperative that we consider the ground floor retail and service uses as a part of each phase of development. Successful TOD plans in the county, but between Dunn-Loring as well as Reston, really do provide that range in terms of having a minimum expectation in line with TOD's expectations for higher intensity development and maximum amounts of retail and service uses. There does need to be, from the literature as well as from our experiences with planning, there does need to be flexibility afforded in terms of the types of retail uses and services, but there really is a need to identify priorities for locations for non-residential development, specifically at the ground floor, and allowing for specific areas to be targeted so that we get that critical mass of retail demand. Any questions? I know I just threw a heck of a lot at you there. I've got a couple more slides regarding other items, but I want to pause there and see if anybody has any specific questions or comments with regards to retail or land use mix.
This is Catherine.
Hey, Catherine.
You guys just use the words flexibility should be afforded. Now, I've worked with this county and the staff for years and years and years, and I find that flexibility goes out the window most of the time. So could you reiterate and expand on what you really mean by that and what the various staff agencies understand the word flexibility to mean?
I can tell you what I mean when I wrote that bullet. So in terms of flexibility with regards to retail, I think one of the things that we've seen is that, especially with the Montgomery County study, in the literature that they produced fairly recently, was that if there needs to be some flexibility on the ground floor to allow for the market to enable certain types of retail and service uses. So I think that you have some examples. I'm not going to name names, but you do have some examples of locations where there's too much in terms of the exact types of uses that you might want. There might be some that say we must have restaurants in this location. We must have this other type of use in this location. And it seems as though the most successful types of mixed-use developments are able to adapt to changing markets. So it's more about providing a space for retail and service uses rather than specifying out what those exact uses should be. So inclusive language, talking about what could be and what we envision to be in an area without being so prescriptive that we're only designing for a specific use. Does that help?
Well, you answered it the way I would expect you to do. I just simply find that when reality hits or the rubber hits the road, then staff gets in its own way, and we fumble around and we drag things out forever. So as long as you can encourage the rest of the county staff to believe what you just said and execute on it, I think that's terrific.
Any other questions or comments? All right.
So Graham, this is Walter. In terms of a comment, so with the analysis and the study that's being done, has anyone through the study spoken directly with these different types of retailers to see how they really feel about this area in the Richmond Highway corridor? I know there was times a few years back, SFDC was speaking with different retailers such as Trader Joe's and looking to bring a Trader Joe's where the Lidl is now going to come in. And the response was that the Richmond Highway corridor was too close of a radius to their other locations. And we kind of find that the Richmond Highway corridor is very close to Old Town, and a lot of the type of retail that we would like to see along the corridor is very close to Old Town and the Springfield area. So it seems as though we have that difficulty attracting some of those retailers. So through these different analyses, have we actually spoken with these different retailers to see what they actually think about the highway in this area? I mean, I know we're building it and what these thoughts are, but to really get some true feedback from these different retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. I have not. I would be interested in seeing, because I know that Neil and his team with WMATA have had some discussions. I'm not sure with which specific retail providers, but I know that they've had some discussions with the commercial industry and the commercial side of things. On our end, no, we have not. We did have the PES folks as a part of the EDA study. Look at the retail demand for the whole of the corridor, but we did not. We haven't spoken with specific retailers to see would Huntington fit. Not yet. So we haven't done that, but I would be interested in hearing if Neil has any updates in terms of that. I know he wants to speak to retail demand as well as part of his presentation.
Good. Thank you.
I think Mary has a question.
Yeah, I would assume that there would be a lot more retail demand if we put in thousands of more units of residential living here and in PennDOT and in, as it Embark unfolds all the way down the highway, there's going to be thousands of more families here, and that the retail would follow that or would grow up alongside of that. It's not just the current demand that we need to think about, but the future demand.
Exactly. I would agree with that, and I would reiterate that the The EDA analysis, and this is no critique of theirs, they were tasked with a specific time frame. They're looking through 2030. And so their projections, 51,000 square feet, accounts for population growth, but it only looks out to 2030. So our comprehensive planning horizon is further afield, 20, 25 years out into the future, at least. So when we're thinking about spaces that might need to be reserved for these types of uses, we're thinking about the long term, and not just through 2030, but for the foreseeable future.
Graham, this is David. I just have another comment on being flexible around retail, because I noticed that the EDA study was done in 2019, so it's pre-pandemic. And there was a recent chamber meeting where I believe it was Bruce Leonard was talking about the loss of retail across the country. I mean, it was like an extraordinary amount. It's something like 2 billion square feet of retail were lost and are not coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if it'd be worth it to, I don't know, if to revisit that study, to perhaps, look at what is a little bit more current as far as what the forecast would be for retail demand, particularly in that area.
That's a great comment, David. I appreciate that very much, and I think we'll need to talk about that. We've looked at previous studies in terms of what you can expect in terms of incremental retail demand, but they were all, as you mentioned, those types of studies were done pre-pandemic. So I'm hesitant to provide like an estimate in terms of what WMATA's generation would be based on those types of rates, because they may no longer be applicable. But I would be interested if there is the possibility of looking at what that incremental demand could be, to see what we could potentially expect in the more near term, so through 2030. I would mention the EDA analysis, the numbers that they were running were 2019, but they did account for the pandemic as a part of their summary, and mentioning that this shift to e-commerce, for example, that we've obviously predates the pandemic, but has certainly been exacerbated by it, is likely to continue. So we acknowledge that retail is that it will need more creative ways of thinking about retail spaces in the future. All right. Any other thoughts? All right. A couple of items regarding phasing of development. So as you all know, the development for the WMATA site is anticipated to occur in phases. So in both instances, both the southern and the northern precincts, as we call them, so southern being along North Kings Highway and the northern being along North Gateway, Huntington Avenue. In both cases, the phases are tied to the eventual demolition of the garages that are in those locations. So that makes sense that you'd have a phased development, and the TOD guidelines do provide some guidance with regards to how should developments be phased and what should they contain within each phase. So the guidelines, the TOD guidelines that we have in the policy plan, note that we should ensure that projects are phased in such a way as to include an appropriate mix of uses in each phase of the development. One example of this, immediately adjacent in terms of site-specific guidance, is with regards to Huntington Club, the Land Unit I guidance, where you have language noting that there should be commitments to priorities such as parks, open space, and connectivity through the site and to the metro station that should be made as a part of the phasing plan. So when we're thinking about WMATA sites, this mix that we had described earlier in the presentation of having residential and non-residential uses provided, as a part of the development. One of the things that we'll want to ensure is that you have that appropriate mix of uses at each phase to ensure that you have mixed use TOD with each phase, so that you're not waiting until the very end, for example, to get all of your retail or all of your office, for example. Another outstanding item is with regards to building heights. Before we talk about Huntington specifically, I wanted to back up and talk about Eisenhower, just immediately across the street. One reason is when you go out to the Huntington Metro sites and you look out across to the north, it's pretty apparent, how successful the Eisenhower Plan has been in terms of getting TOD level density. One of the things that I mentioned is that the Eisenhower Plan updates included a lot of flexibility with regards to use. One of the specific focuses again was that retail components, and then another specific thing with regards to ensuring that you have TOD level density, where there was the guidance that they have in their comp plan for heights, for building heights. So as you'll notice, the M in this location is the Eisenhower Avenue Metro Station. So this is the location where the highest concentrations of height are located. So it's kind of hard to see on this screen. It's fairly small. But the red blocks, those are blocks 9B and 11. Those are blocks where you have a range in terms of minimum and maximum heights, a minimum of 200 feet and a maximum of 400 feet. And then from there, it tapers down, as you might expect, in line with their urban concept of concentrating the highest levels of intensity closest to the metro station. So the lighter colors represent smaller building heights, shorter building heights. So you have across the blocks reduction in terms of both the minimum and the maximum building heights, 300 feet and 150 feet, and then all the way down on some of the edges down to, I think in one case there's one block where it's about 75 feet in terms of minimum height, for example. So looking across the way to our area, to the Huntington TDA, what we have on the left-hand side, this is the height map for the Huntington Transit Development area. And I will reiterate, this is one of the only locations, one of 10 locations in addition to Tyson's in the county where high-rise is encouraged and really can be considered. So in terms of the real estate for high-rise in the county, there's relatively few locations where we consider heights of this size. So we want to be economical in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the types of buildings that we can expect in these areas. A couple of things to note with regards to the adopted plan guidance. The first is that our site is located in the dead center, as you know. There is no current height limit to these areas. However, there is no planned residential or office uses in these locations. It's just WMATA's operation that's planned in these locations. So that makes sense. A couple of other things. The Huntington Club, which is immediately to the west, contains a tapered height recommendation. So in the areas that's closest to the station platform, you see a height recommendation of a maximum of 200 feet in total height. And then the area that is to the west and to the south of that tapers down to 55 feet at the property edge. So that's mostly due to the fact that you have single-family homes that are immediately across North Kings Highway from the site. So the idea is that you have some tapering and compatibility with those that are with the building types that are immediately adjacent across the highway. The Parker proposal, or the Parker site, for example, 165 feet in terms of total height. Some of the buildings that are immediately across Huntington Avenue, anywhere from 40 feet in total height to 150 feet, depending on their locations. A couple of other things at the southern end of the station. So the area that's now being built out with the Aventon, that area has a existing height recommendation of 200 feet in total height. This is the area that's also has an entitled office building that's kind of a mid-rise office building that's entitled in this location. The Huntington Station Shopping Center has a redevelopment option, TOD level redevelopment option, and there are height recommendations for anywhere from 40 to 110 feet in terms of total height. And then the Huntington Station, the courts at Huntington Station, which is the mid-rise and townhouses immediately to the south of the station, has a height recommendation of 55 feet. So that's the current concept. There are a couple of considerations, and it's mostly with regards to where can density be most closely concentrated nearest to the metro station, with a tapering when you get closer to lower density residential areas on the periphery of the TDA. So what does it look like in terms of the area today in relation to what could be in terms of total height? So this is a view of North Kings Highway looking south towards the courts at Huntington Station on the left. and then Huntington Station Shopping Center on the right-hand side. So as you can see, right now, the courts at Huntington Station, four-story buildings, so not approaching the TOD level, 200 feet in total height. Density, it's closer to that 55 feet in total height. And then the one story of retail and shopping on the Huntington Station Shopping Center. Looking to the north, same location, just turned around. So this is looking north on North Kings Highway. You have duplex development that's across the street in the Jefferson Manor neighborhood. And so that's a conservation area that's planned to remain. So that's a duplex level development, not terribly tall, obviously kind of a lower density residential building type. On Huntington Avenue, there's a bit more variety in terms of total height. So you go up one high-rise building that's located in that 90 to 150 foot height zone. That's kind of a focal point in terms of the Huntington Avenue streetscape and frontage. Some of the area that's further along down the track, you have the Parker, which is built out with a mid-rise product. However, the plan recommendation does allow for up to 165 feet in terms of total height. Turned around, so this is looking to the east along Huntington Avenue, so same location, just flipped 180 degrees. There are duplexes in the Huntington neighborhood that are immediately kind of on the periphery of the corner. So this is an area in particular where some edge considerations in terms of the new development with the Huntington Metro Station should be potentially considered. So a couple of thoughts with regards to how this might look. We got a couple of sections or a couple of quadrants here that should illustrate where some different height considerations should go. So this dark blue area that's kind of the largest square is where the TDA concept and the TOD's concept of having the highest intensities of development would most likely be the most appropriate. So the areas closest to the station, inwards, so located away from the areas that are that have edge considerations. These are the areas where high-rise development and some mid-rise development would be appropriate along North Kings Highway frontage. There is a consideration with regards to tapering or potentially a daylight plane, line of sight, whatever language you'd like to call, to ensure that you have a tapering effect along the North Kings Highway frontage, given that there is lower density residential developments across the street. I would argue that given that this is a metro site, that the edge consideration might not necessarily be the same as what you see at Huntington Club. However, I do think that there should be some consideration for tapering height, tapering form down as you get closer to North Kings Highway for compatibility reasons. And then finally, I don't have much information on this, but I think that the WMATA team will share some information regarding the tunnel. So as y'all know, the Huntington Metro Station does go into the hillside, and there is a tunnel that runs for about 1/4 mile further south of the platform. So that carries with it some considerations with regards to the types of structures that can go over top of that. So I'll let them speak to that with regards to how that kind of influences the development program in particular. Excuse me. All right, and then on the northern phase, so the Huntington Avenue frontage. So as I mentioned, this is not anticipated to commence until the north garage reaches the end of its life. However, this is a great location in terms of the highest intensities of development and therefore the highest heights. So it's in an area where you have some existing high-rise development and areas where there's planning for higher rise development. Hold on a second. Excuse me. And finally, with regards to the northern phase, there is an edge consideration in that northeastern corner. And this is the area where you have the Huntington neighborhood, 2-story adjacent immediately to the site. So there should be some considerations with regards to tapering height, potentially in this location as well. So a couple of key takeaways with regards to height. Height recommendations, that we put on this site should enable mid and high-rise development patterns. Taller building heights are most appropriate when they're grouped with others, providing a great skyline. also allows them to take advantage of, take advantage of the grouping in terms of urban form. Tapering height is appropriate along site edges bordering lower density residential and residentially planned uses. So those areas that are specifically adjacent to the duplexes and single family uses surrounding the site do warrant some consideration with regards to tapering. And then I would also note that the authorization, so this is the board's authorization, does note a minimum height consideration of 55 feet. So lower building forms, which don't really generate the type of density and activity level that are designed in the TRDs, might not be appropriate for this specific site. Finally, I'll touch on open space very briefly because I think I'm probably well over my time. But here's the
Graham, I think there's a question.
Oh, go ahead. I can't see, so thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Mary,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm wondering how you could take into consideration the slope in determining building heights. Do you try to put taller ones at the bottom of the slope or put them all at the same height up and down the slope? And when you're thinking of a view from the top, or I don't know, how do you, I'd like to see a 3D model of that. How do you take that into consideration?
Sure. Here's what I can do. I will send you a diagram and then also kind of an explanation in terms of how they do it for zoning purposes, because I think it is one of these concepts that's probably best illustrated when you have a section showing the grade and then how height gets measured. So happy to forward that along to the task force.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sure. All right, and then finally, I'll touch base on open space, and then I'm going to turn it over to the WMATA team. The image that you see on the left-hand side is the adopted Huntington Transit Development Area open space map. So a couple of considerations and kind of features of this map. The first is that you have open space areas. So these are active open spaces, usable open spaces. So a portion of it that you'll see is the area where you have Mount Eagle Park. So that's an area where you have active open spaces, parks, for example. Another is landscape buffers. So this is the area that's in that green hatch, and where you have considerations where compatibility between uses that are especially on the periphery of the TDA should be considered. So when you're doing redevelopment and you're looking at trying to ensure that you have a compatible transition between higher intensity uses and the lower intensity uses, that landscape buffering can be a component of those development programs. And then you have 3 stars, green stars. These are public plazas, public open spaces. One was added as a part of the task force's work for the Parker, for example, looking at that specific corner at Metroview Parkway and Huntington Avenue. There are 2 that are nearer to our site. One is at the what some will call the Abington Park, so the park that's immediately kind of in the crux of the Abington development. And then there's one that's across North Kings Highway, closer to the post office. So those are locations that are kind of thought of as central plazas or public spaces. And as I think as a part of this, the consideration of this concept, we'll be looking at updates to the TDA map to reflect open space and to reflect public plazas in particular. So a couple of images that I'll show you, just a couple additional ones. Here's a map showing some of the locations of the existing open space in the area. So you have from left to right, you have the Abington Park, so to speak, for lack of a better term. That's the area that's surrounding the Abington development, which is currently under construction. The largest circle is the conservation easement area. So this is that high slope area that is currently in an easement for stormwater purposes, and we have a lot of mature vegetation. The area immediately to the east of that, on the other side of the middle garage, is an area that was regraded as a part of the middle garage, but has also been replanted, and where you see a lot of fledgling but thriving vegetation. So this is another area where it's existing green space, in an area that's currently not in an easement, so to speak, but is an area where, when we're considering trade-offs in terms of the developments closest to North Kings Highway that encroaches into that a portion of that easement area, that this is an area where considerations for green space and potential swapping of easement area could be considered. And then finally, you have this area along Huntington Avenue between the the elevated rail and the north garage. That it looks small. It is relatively small, but does have kind of a more intimate feel. It's a nice area for bringing people in to the northern end of the metro station today. And then looking at kind of the overall area in terms of the open space network. So a couple of features here. One is from left to right, so we'll do that scheme again. The Aventon Park, the area surrounding the Aventon, that area is shown in, at least in this concept, as a green area. I would mention that, you know, as we're thinking about, you know, what's the appropriate mix of uses within each phase, this is one area that is relatively small in terms of its block, but might be appropriate for, you know, some type of more active use for a building, for example, potentially a non-residential building. So I mean, one of the concepts that WMATA will show describes this area with potentially non-residential uses, potentially as an office use, reflecting in what's entitled there, for example. So there's an office building that's currently entitled for that location. In this case, it's a mid-rise building. So that's one specific location, you know, has the ability to take advantage of, you know, the location nearest to the Aventon, the S1 block, the courts at Huntington. So a central gathering feature for the people that live kind of in that area. The next one is kind of the main, one of the main open space areas, which is the area immediately above the BRT station. So this is the park, the urban park that's located on top of that station area, and can serve, I think, in a lot of respects, as kind of the central gathering point for the TVA potentially. So I think that development should, you know, the development of that park should be very, very thoughtfully considered, and should in potentially, if we're looking at specific, you know, locations for retail, this could be one of the locations where, you know, having some sort of activation between the S2 building and that open space would be truly beneficial. A couple of other locations of potential open space, you know, obviously the conservation easement park area that's identified here, that is currently a conservation area, but is one location that I think we've heard from the task force that there can be some considerations in terms of, you know, ways in which we might use this area, you know, more as a park, so that you have some sort of connectivity through it and allow for, you know, people to enjoy it, whereas currently it's closed off and people can't use it. Lastly, I'll leave you with the area that's, you know, the potential area where you might pick up some area that might be lost as a part of redevelopment in the S3 block, with the conservation area potentially in the middle garage, onto the east of the middle garage. And then finally, the area between the N2 building and the N1 building, similar location to the existing connection that you have to the northern station entrance, but this would be another potential great location for either retail or some sort of active use on the ground level that's paired with open space area that people can enjoy. And that's about it. Anybody have any questions regarding open space, heights, anything that we've gone over tonight?
Graham, can I suggest, given it's 7:45, we just let you know, the WMATA team to make their presentation there and maybe hold the questions to the end.
Fine with me, of course. All right. So Neil, do you want to feel free to take over, and we don't have to let you share. You can share whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm just going to be brief again, Graham. That was a very thorough presentation, so a lot to take in. And I will simply say I'm going to have our architect Miguel Arola from Horde Copeland Mock present some slides. Some of them are going to be familiar because they're obviously have a lot of the base images that Graham used. But this is truly an opportunity to kind of take the concepts that Graham's been articulating and show how we've been thinking about possible ways to, you know, develop them and see how the nomination could fit or not fit various elements on the site. So given the time, and we have not as many slides as Graham, but we still have a decently long presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel, who can go through the presentation. I'll jump back in on a couple of things, but Miguel, you ready?
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks, Neil. So, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Miguel Irula. I'm with Horde Copeland Mocht. We're the planners, architects, and landscape architects for this project. And joining me, as you see, is Neil Teague with Stout and Teague, and I think Stephen Segerland's also with WMATA. He's also in the audience and can field any questions, plus some additional team members. So the agenda for today's, let me get this thing. Okay. Our agenda for tonight in this presentation is I'll give an overview of the site conditions, and Neil will give some economic factors that were considered in the land plan for the Huntington Metro Station. Also, there'll be a discussion of the plan framework using some diagramming, and also next will be followed a discussion of the density options, and finally a review of the open space considerations as well. So this plan is of the site with some conditions that have influenced the site design. Clearly, the most challenging consideration is the topography, plus the location of the transit facilities to remain. Areas of steep slopes are located mainly in the forested area in that dark green area. Plus, there's a few kind of to the east of the middle garage. There's some metro facilities such as the tail tracks, which I'll get into in a little bit, the elevated tracks on the north side, the actual platform, the north bus loop, and the kiss and ride, plus the middle garage, all of which will remain as part of the redevelopment. Additionally, there's some height transitions to consider, and I think Graham touched a little bit on that. Basically, when we're confronting or backing onto lower density homes from a compatibility standpoint. So this diagram illustrates how much elevation change there really is on the site. Each color change represents 10 feet of elevation. So there's about 140 feet of grade change from Huntington Avenue on the low side to North Kings Highway on the high side. And as you can see, the flatter areas are to the south, which kind of indicated in beige area there. So there's plus or minus 10 feet within that area. Marine clays. This exhibit kind of indicates areas with probability of marine clays, which can hamper building construction. Most of these areas are limited to the forested portions or the steeply sloped areas, including the designated conservation area. So outlined in blue is the property line. Also, as Graham mentioned, we do have a track influence zone. There are some underground tunnels that contain the tail tracks for the metro, which extend from the southern portal area almost to Huntington Park Drive, and they're shown in blue here. We have superimposed the proposed development over the tail tracks, which are the red lines there. And our structural engineer has reviewed what we have proposed and has indicated no issues thus far. However, adding additional floors or a change in construction type could potentially impact the tunnels and the added weight, so we're avoiding that at all costs. Also, as Graham mentioned, with regards to neighboring properties, the building height along North Kings Highway is limited, somewhat due to compatibility with the confronting single-family homes that are shown on the Jefferson Manor, and also along this frontage with regards to uses. What you see kind of outlined in red is what we're indicating of how we would activate that frontage. One would be either with lobbies or some other kind of amenity that's related to the residential, such as the business center or fitness center that has a lot of glass and it's certainly visible from North Kings Highway. Or potentially some walkout units. These are ground floor units with doors that lead out onto the sidewalk, or potentially retail on those ends. So Neil, you can take it away with this slide.
Thank you. I think I'm off mute. Yeah, this is just a summary that we pulled from the same study Graham mentioned from the EDA study that was done in, I guess started in 2019, but published just this February in 2021. And I think we absolutely concur with Graham's presentation that you need a mix of uses to activate this area and to serve the needs of the area. What I've shown here was for the study, there's about 163,000 square feet of retail in the Huntington North Gateway area now, 250,000 feet of office. And again, the EDA study, I rounded it, is 50,000 for the next 10 years, let's say. And they said potentially up to 400,000 for the next 10 years as well. I looked at what's already in the plan for various uses. This is not necessarily what's proposed by any given developer, but it is what's in the plan. And this is actually, with a slight rounding, this is what Huntington Club has approved. They have about 40,000 feet of retail in their plan and about 235,000 square feet of office. What Graham's calling the Parker, the 2550 Huntington Avenue, is actually approved for office, 254,000 feet of office and 6,000 square feet of retail. The plan option that I believe was approved, went through the task force and was approved by the board earlier this year, allows a residential option, but this was already on the book. So there's certainly an opportunity, if the market warrants, for them to fulfill that by building an office building instead of residential. The Huntington Station, which is it's a nice name for them, but it does create confusion. It's the retail property across North Kings Highway from the station itself. It's owned by the Dwoskin companies. Currently has about 50,000 square feet of retail, and the approved comp plan allows for up to another 85,000 square feet of retail or office, in addition to residential uses. The Arden, which is under construction, has about 75,000 square feet of office in its plan, and the current WMATA site is approved for 30,000 square feet of retail and 250,000 square feet of office. So the only point being that there is absolutely, as Graham noted, plenty of room in the comp plan to fulfill what at least EDA thinks might be demand, not only for the Huntington area, but actually the whole Huntington North Gateway. And of course, there are other development sites outside of the transit development area itself. So I think the issue, and I appreciated Graham's comment and very much Catherine's, of flexibility is important. The entitlements are there if the market is there. But they also raised a couple of other points. They were, I think, noted that and this is just a quote, it says the county should be cautious about incentivizing retail development and requiring inclusion of retail space in future housing developments. I think there's just a recognition that they're given some limited demand, even with new units, it should be quality over quantity. And I certainly agree. Again, they did note that Huntington should be one of the areas where there could be opportunities. And they also just flatly said, development of a new major office building in the corridor is unlikely over the next 5 to 10 years. The fact is that there hasn't been a new office building built in the corridor in 17 years. So I'm the first to, having had a long career, to say that the past is no prediction of the future. So things can change, and we very much believe in this area, but we think it's simply important to be aware of the demand factors as well. Could you go to the next slide, please, Miguel, since you, and then the other point is a similar one with regard to construction. High-rise construction is considerably more expensive than mid-rise construction. It's just a different type of construction, involves different materials. And where the market will support it, obviously you get more density. In the residential case here, you see many developments in the Richmond Highway corridor that are being built and are successful, and they are being built as mid-rise developments that rent, and this is obviously real estate speak, but at $202.45 a square foot, is what they're expecting, and they can make their cost work, or at least they could make their cost work in the past years against those numbers. To go to high rise is really about a 40% increase, and it's going to simply take a 40% increase in rents to do that. It's less of a certain proposition that the Huntington area can, at least at present, support that, which doesn't mean it never will. Frankly, it has in the past. You have high-rise units at Montebello and up and down the corridor. So there are times when the equation is different. In any event, simply point that out because as you look at phasing, if there's a requirement to go to a certain minimum or certain minimum heights, it could very much affect the timing or the feasibility of a development as it moves ahead. One of the strong advantages we see of the Huntington corridor is to be a value proposition for the Amazon corridor. We can compete, of course, with Alexandria, where you do see high-rise going on, but we don't necessarily have all their locational advantages. And so if we don't have a cost advantage, we might not find ourselves being as competitive as we are if we do a quality development that may be with a different cost structure. So that's kind of the economic side of this discussion of our thinking as we look at this plan. I'm going to turn it back over to Miguel.
Okay, thanks. Now we can start talking a little bit about the plan itself. So this diagram illustrates the conceptual urban design plan for the proposed WMATA concept plan. And it shows building edges that address streets or open spaces, which are kind of those heavy black lines. And also what you see here is some clear paths to get to the north and the southern metro portal. As I mentioned before in a couple of other meetings, all roads lead to Rome. It's certainly the case here because this is a transit-oriented development as well. Also shown here are the primary public open spaces and some potential views. And I think that Graham kind of indicated some of those spaces to you. Also, we did a little bit of deeper dive with regards to showing you more open space, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Regarding the pedestrian framework and connectivity, essentially, is this exhibit also kind of illustrates the pedestrian network that is being proposed for this for the WMATA concept plan, and really connections off-site. The majority of these paths are sidewalks and along streets, where, frankly, I think they should be. People are more comfortable walking next to buildings and having that comfort with as long as the streetscape is appropriate. But again, all these connections eventually lead to the metro entrances, which I think is paramount. We're not too far off from what Graham has shown with regards to this. In fact, I think we're very close to having a very similar strategy for pedestrian connectivity. In terms of land use, the WMATA plan encompasses the buildable areas really on the north side and the south side of the property. The south side, which is this area S1, S2, S3, is generally mid to high-rise residential, and it's organized on those three blocks. There is ancillary retail or some other activating use, which would be located at the corners of the buildings and oriented towards North Kings Highway. Now, North Kings Highway is not a cozy street. If it's anticipated that there would be cafe seating there and so forth, I mean, there could be from a limited basis, but really, I mean, there's probably better places for that type of retail. Not to say that it couldn't be there. And what happens in the middle of the building, as I mentioned before, there could be stooped entrances or to the residential units, or exposing some other building amenity out to the street. There is a new bus loop, which is covered right here, which is covered by a public open space, which is part of the new Metro mezzanine, which is being designed at the south entrance. Accommodations also have been made within that bus loop for the future BRT as well. And there's a second public open space on the south side, which is located in front of the Aventon Apartments, which I think Graham started to describe, which is located right here. And it is contained nicely by building face. So the middle part of the site still remains as the Metro platform, which is that dark blue area. Also, the north end, that's the middle portion. The north end is comprised of 4 blocks, essentially the N2, and N1, N2, N3, and also the replacement garage for the metro. So it's typically high-rise office building, which is N1, and it's nearest to the metro portal. And also that replacement garage, as I mentioned, is placed north of the middle garage, and it has potential connections between the middle garage and the north garage. Ancillary retail and other activating uses, as I mentioned, are be located at N1 and N2 under this plan. And the north bus loop and kiss and ride would remain unchanged, which is this kind of purplish area. N3 is designated as townhomes. Again, as Graham kind of mentioned, there is a transition here between Biscayne Avenue, the duplexes that are there, and what would occur on this parcel here. So at this for the WMATA concept at this point, there's some townhomes there mainly from compatibility reasons. In terms of density, the WMATA plan proposes about 1,040 to 1,150 residential units of varying types. There's 246,000 square feet of non-residential uses, and the total gross square footage is 1.389 million square feet. The gross density based on the 29-acre site is 1.09 FAR. And just a little bit more detail with regards to what happens on these blocks. Each block is indicated with a unit count, a maximum height, and parking for each of the blocks. You can see from a height standpoint, and this I think is in keeping with what Graham had mentioned. You know, this is a 13-story building right next to Metro, and then everything on the north side, with the exception of N3, essentially is 18 stories and 18 stories. So we're approaching that 200-foot height limit with buildings that are the closest to Metro. As Graham mentioned, we did do some additional concepts that kind of show how we would achieve the full density that's been requested. So this is density alternative concept A. So essentially what this does is increases the residential unit count on the south side by adding additional floors and height to blocks S2 and S3, which are shown here in orange. Since they are not really constrained by the tunnel tracks, and then this portion of S2 can go a little higher because it could be tapered along Kings Highway to get that point. S1 essentially cannot do that because the tail tracks are really right on top of it. There is a new building here that's changed, which is S4, which is shown in blue, which would indicate a non-residential use as well. Now that would displace that open space area that's in front of the Aventon. Now on the north side, the unit count is also increased by adding additional floors and height on building N2, and then N3, instead of townhomes, will convert to like a podium building of flats essentially that would be parked up below underneath it. So this plan proposes about 1,400 to 1,500 residential units, 302,000 square feet of non-residential, for a total gross square footage of 1.792 million square feet. And the gross density is 1.41 FAR. So with regards to building heights and so forth, it's not too dissimilar from the previous plan, with the exception is S2 gets additional height. And we increase the S3 to 16 levels here. These two, N1 and N2, essentially remain the same height, but we just infill portions of this building to achieve additional density. And as I mentioned, N3 goes from a 3-story townhome to a 6 to 7 level apartment building. Again, there is some concern with regards to compatibility along Biscayne Road with this concept. So let's see, this is density alternative concept B. So this is another concept. So this one leaves the south side essentially unchanged from the WMATA concept plan. But for the north side, there's a new building that's been placed here on N4, which is called N4, which replaces that north WMATA garage with a new residential building. This assumes at some point in the future that demand for parking at the station does not justify the need to replace the north garage. It has to do a little bit with phasing on that. And blocks N1 and N2 would be consolidated into a mixed-use block with a shared garage for both the residential and the office components. N3 is, again, as I mentioned, would be replaced with townhome units for that podium-style building type. With regards to building heights and so forth, again, I mentioned as this on the south side, it would essentially remain the same as the WMATA concept plan. But I think that you would get additional height here at N4. So nearest Metro on the north side, you have a 15-story building, 18-story building, and 18-story building, and then this bumps up from 3 to 6 to 7 levels. So you're getting considerably more height on the north side with this concept plan. Next, we analyzed the buildable land area to see how it related to the gross and net density. So the gross site area is 29.57 acres and contains a significant area dedicated to transit facilities, conservation areas, and other forested or unforested sloped areas. We have delineated these areas as non-buildable and it's outlined in red. And as I mentioned before, the north ends of the site is where the redevelopment would occur. We have shaded these areas in yellow. 13.74 acres or 46% of the site is essentially buildable. So the effective density when you start, we were looking at density on the gross, but when you look at the effective density or the net density for density plan A or for the WMATA concept plan, it's at 2.32 FAR, which is compared to the gross density at 1.09 FAR. But the effective density or the net density for the density plan A, which is the second plan that I showed you, is the net density is like 2.99 FAR, nearly 3 FAR, and that's compared to the gross density that's proposed for that plan at 1.41 FAR. So I think this analysis kind of just shows the difference between net and gross density, because when you look at it from a net standpoint, getting into that 2.3 FAR is a TOD density that we're all trying to achieve here. With regards to the open space on this, and we analyzed the WMATA plan, which is shown here on for open space, and broke it down into the various types, such as the public urban parks, streetscape, some residual open space, private open space, and conservation areas. We excluded street pavement, WMATA facilities, and building footprints for this exercise. But the WMATA plan provides about 13.29 acres of open space of all types, whether it's a conservation area or the people spaces. The people spaces are the dark green, which we call public urban parks, which would be landscaped and designed to at a much higher degree of meaning in terms of making it pedestrian friendly and so forth, as opposed to the streetscape, which is really for kind of conduit for pedestrians. But I should also mention on this that with the WMATA plan providing 44.9% of open space, it's critical to understand that there is a requirement for urban parks, which is based on unit count. And this WMATA plan requires 3.06 acres and provides 3.37 acres of urban park area. So we're just a little bit over our limit or our requirement with regards to urban parks. So we did a similar analysis for density plan A, and really the big difference there is this UP2, where we placed actually a building right on top of the Abington Green. And what that does is it does reduce our urban park space by about an acre, so, or by quarter acre, I'm sorry. And our total open space that's being provided is slightly less than 13 acres at 12.95. But I think the reason is that that as soon as you add residential units, you have a higher requirement for this number, this 4.03. But this one's showing a deficit of about an acre, because again, mainly because of this, and plus we're adding a lot more units to this. So with regards to that, I mean, it's a decision that would need to be made. Do you give up a public space here to put building in order to get some additional density out of this. This ends my presentation on this. Certainly open it up to any kind of questions you might have.
Yeah, that was a lot, and then Miguel went through it fairly quickly, just recognizing that Graham had already set the stage with a lot of information. So but we wanted to kind of show how some of these concepts could be fleshed out, and give you a sense of some of the trade-offs that we'd start to deal with for this particular site. And I think that's, that concludes. So we might still make 8:30 depending on what people's questions people have for either this presentation or for Graham's.
I've got a few questions to start, if I could. This is Tim Sargent. Could I, Walter, is that okay?
Most definitely, yes, sir.
All right. Looking just to some clarification first, looking at your public open space residual, and just to refresh, make sure I'm correct, isn't that part of the slope area too?
That is correct. It is green, but yes, it is a sloped area. It's probably inaccessible, but it's still green.
But does that measure into your equation for urban parkland, or
no?
Given the slope, I'm concerned about that.
Well, it isn't technically urban parkland. If you could look at the darker green areas that are labeled UP,
Yeah.
those are urban parks that are truly either have building or they front onto streets. They're clearly accessible to the public, and that's the key park type that we're looking at.
Also, the issue that caught my attention too is you look at the traffic pattern into the Metro garage. How does that influence, and I'm potentially negatively, the walkability, the sense of place for those adjacent residential? I would think the traffic level there, especially in mornings or afternoons, would be a significant influence on walkability or sense or outdoor activity.
Are you referring to the north side or the south side?
Probably the north side.
North side, yeah, that has really one access point coming into accessing the middle garage and would come into the north garage. It is slightly sloped here too. We're allowing for ample space between the face of the building and the curb line, so it's going to be fairly generous with regards to sidewalk and street trees and understanding that there is like for example on these townhomes that kind of medium colored green, that's kind of public or private, semi-private space. That's kind of someone's front yard. So again, I think we have plenty of dimension here, about 20-25 feet between the face of the curb to the face of the building for that to happen.
You also talked about residential or entertainment or whatever type of amenities, that some people had considered along North Kings Highway. And I tend to agree with you. I think that could be very problematic. I'm wondering why you couldn't move some of that concept within the UP4, UP5 areas, if that's at all possible.
It is possible. It is possible. I think that WMATA would have to weigh in a little bit on that with regards to there is it's not their typical kiss and ride, but it is a kiss and ride, which occurs right in here for the transit use. I think the thought is that perhaps maintaining that for transit users at all possible and not having to share essentially with retail is of concern. There could be some kind of transit store on the back side of this building, since we do have a little bit of grade change that we can pop in some kind of transit store perhaps. But it would be some type of use that perhaps does not require like user parking that's normally, like say retail, for example, would need.
One final, then I'll be quiet, and that's as we look at high density development here, and we listened to a report today about the housing affordability throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, not just in our neck of the woods here in Northern Virginia. What anticipated range, and this is just as much for the county as it is for our presentation tonight, our guests. where are we going here in terms of rental and housing affordability? Do we see more families for rental versus single, single or non-family occupation here? Occupants, what is the thought? Because you've got a density issue here. We also have an affordability issue that seems to be growing through the Commonwealth, and I wanted to get some sense of how that mix fits in as we're looking at residential versus commercial or non-residential.
I'll let Neil
Any
handle
thoughts
that
on?
one.
And that's very broad.
Sure.
Yeah, Tim, this is Neil. We do conceive this as primarily rental. First of all, and I think as it may have been discussed in a previous policy presentation that Graham did in another meeting, the guidelines are for in Huntington are for 15% affordability, and so we understand that that's going to at least 15% of these units would have to be affordable. We, as you may know, Amazon has a program that not with a cooperation program with WMATA, but also a broader program to try to support affordable housing in the area. And in fact, we're speaking with them tomorrow. We have been pursuing the opportunity to have them participate in this project. Unfortunately, they do have very strict time limits, and I'm not sure whether this process is going to accommodate that. But if they were to participate, their participation is predicated in supporting affordability at a higher percentage than the minimums.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
So we're interested in that. We're interested in looking at it. And as I mentioned before, one of the reasons while we want the unit count, we're also concerned about going true high rise. It's because it really, really drives the cost into a different level of whether it's rent or sale requirement. And if it's subsidized, it's that just deeper subsidies required.
Well, that caught my attention too. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll be quiet.
There are 3 other task force members that have questions, and if we could go in the following order: Catherine, Evan, and then Mary, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Hi, Neil, it's good to see you.
Hi.
As you know, the IDI project at Huntington Club has been approved, and part of that approval speaks to a connectivity of green space and things of that nature with the WMATA site. What conversations have you been having? Where's that going to be located? When do you think you'll get on with it? That's question 1.
Okay.
The second
You want me to answer
question,
that or wait? I'll wait.
no, go ahead. Answer that one.
And Miguel may chime in. We've had several meetings facilitated by the county, Joanne Phoebe and others. I think Joanne's still on the call, NIDI, and we've talked about a number of things. The consultant that the county hired, that Graham showed you a little bit of, has also provided some ideas. We've studied a number of ideas, and we have a couple of different ways to handle it. We are planning another meeting, as Graham mentioned, in another presentation on that. So stay tuned. I guess you're saying, where's it going? I know you're impatient, but we have to figure out what and how we can impact this conservation easement area, and how that might work. So it's a strong consideration, but we have some straightforward connectivity that's, I think, pretty much in the bag on the north end, and on the south end, it's just a question of whether there's a connectivity option that's viable in the middle.
Okay, thank you. Next comment, if I understood you correctly, you made a comment that Amazon, you've had conversations with them about them maybe weighing in with you guys in some capacity, but that this process time-wise probably won't fit into their needs. What are you referring to? WMATA can't get off their butts to get on with it, or the county getting in the way, or what exactly is the problem?
I'm just saying the planning process is such, Amazon wants to fund projects that can have units occupied by the end of 2025. Not started, not entitled, people living
Okay,
there.
so okay,
And it's just, the process is such that it takes a while, and we're still in the we're still in the plan process. We haven't started a CDP process. Walmart is not going to be the developer. We have to go find a developer. I think there's others who may win this race. That's all. Well, Amazon has a lot of money, but they don't have an unlimited amount of money.
well, I guess my question to that is everything in this county seems to take forever. And as a citizen and a taxpayer, it's getting to be, and an old lady, it's getting to be very annoying that everything takes forever. And I'll probably be dead before we get any of these great concepts done. And frankly, that's going to annoy me very much. But why can't, and this is a conversation to the staff, why can't we help these folks get on with these things quicker? Please, that's a statement. And the other question is, I know we've all got concerns about whether we're going to have office in the future or not office in the future. But are you all considering anything related to the concept that they're doing at Skyline with, it's mixed. You can have an office or you can have a residential unit. And I can't think off the top of my head at the moment what those things are called.
Yeah, live work.
Yeah, live work. Are you looking at any of that?
Well, the problem is nobody's quite figured out. The ones that I'm aware of are adaptations of existing buildings. There's not been a lot of purpose built. And I think it's unclear what the actual, form of demand is. Are you renting to individuals? Are you renting to companies? And frankly, I think the county, and it's no reflection on Fairfax County, but all this talk about office, retail, non-residential, residential, non-residential, if you put it all in one building, I don't even know how they deal with it. So there's a bunch of questions there, Kat. I think it's coming, but we're not actively thinking we understand how it's going to play out on this site. And Miguel, has practice expands over, multiple building regions and product type. Miguel, do you have any other thoughts about that? Do you have anything on the boards that's truly live, work, design, build?
Not design, build. A little bit of live, work. You just design the buildings that way, or the units that way, where you would have like the ground floor and like a mezzanine where you'd live, and the ground floor would be. And this is for, the not the doctors or anything like that, but like a insurance agent or someone like that. The architect perhaps that has a very small practice that would have do a live, work kind of thing. I mean, if you were to do it on this site, it would be on, I'd say like North Kings Highway would give you a nice place to do it, to help activate that, or any other part, really, any of those blocks would be pretty.
Yeah, I think we should. I think you've got a good point. It would be something worth looking at. I just don't know if all the development economics are fully understood.
Right.
But it's worth looking at.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
If Evan could go next, and Ellen, I see you have your hand raised, so if you could go after Mary, please. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested to know in terms of like and I don't know if you're there yet in terms of where the retail would go on these buildings. I mean, I saw the slide where you had the red activation zones on the corners. Is that where you would plan to put the retail in the building, or which part of the buildings would it all be along either North Kings Highway or Huntington where the retail would go?
Right now, that would be our priority area, as we're showing on that one slide, where they are kind of on the corners. And the reason they're on the corners, we can expand the sidewalk easily at the end of the corners. Plus, we would have access for parking. The parking, these are parked in a podium underneath, right next to it, and it'd be on the same level as the retail. We'd have to give up a little bit of parking on those levels in order for it to work. But again, and it just depends on what type of tenant would want to go in those particular spaces. But you're right, the priority would be where those red areas would be.
Okay. And then is there any, I guess, you know, I saw like in one building you had 10,000 square feet, and that might just be one retailer, like a small grocer or something. Is there any thoughts about subsidizing retail or working with the county to subsidize retail in order to have smaller spaces for kind of local businesses? Or do you think you're mostly going to be looking for, you know, chains or credit tenant kind of retail?
We'd be happy to talk with the county about a program for smaller retailers. Personally, I don't see this as much being a bigger box, and obviously not big box opportunity. It's currently smaller scale. Again, I'd be happy at a future meeting to have Ronnie Robbins of Dwascan, who we've worked cooperatively with for 20 years across the street. They know retail very well. They could talk at length about some of the questions that Walter asked about, you know, attitudes of retailers toward this area and so on. But we see this as serving the community rather than being necessarily a destination retail. People can and do take the metro to retail, but we see this more as retail that serves the community that's being built here, as well as transit patrons. But it needs to be focused on the surrounding community.
Yeah. I mean, I just also see like some, I think, opportunities like between like building 1 and 2, where you have that kind of alley between them that could create almost like a little Main Street-esque type retail. I don't know, just some places to create almost, you know, that kind of walkable district type retail that might not be necessarily off the highway or one of the major roads, but coming off of it perpendicularly like that.
I think that's an interesting opportunity, and certainly one we'd want to take a look at. The one thing we're fighting here a little bit is just the parking question of how much the retail requires parking versus serving people who are already here. Some of the things that Graham showed earlier, like Dunloring and other things, I know they have substantial above grade parking garages that support the retail, separate and apart from WMATA's parking. We don't conceive this as having above grade parking, which means everything we do has to be underground, and that really puts a premium on cost. So I have to say I'm a little bit, so if we add retail and adds parking, at some point we have to lose residential units just because we don't have an ability to serve them with parking.
Space. Yeah, maybe we'll have those flying drone cars by the time this comes online, and then we won't have to worry about parking.
If we do, I'm wondering why we need a metro. So
right, good point. That's a good point. All right, thank you.
Okay, Mary.
Yeah, I was just wanted to request that we get these slideshows posted on the website, perhaps ahead of getting the meeting video. I'd like to kind of flip back and forth and look at these maps again. And then the other thing is, I think you might have addressed this, but I didn't quite understand the answer. And this involves getting people up the 140-foot grade, both metro, you know, both on hard surfaces and through the conservation area. If that's opened up, would that be opened up as a transit through it, or just like a little bit at the top? What kind of solutions do you have for that?
Miguel, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I don't think we would have people kind of in the conservation area going, say, for example, along this edge. I know that Huntington Club is proposing a connection here, and then ultimately a connection into the portal here for Metro. They do function as really two stations. You have a north side and a south side, and the grade break in between is really kind of challenging in terms of accessibility. So what we've really tried to attempt to do is really to make the connectivity and the pedestrian environment and all of that occur kind of almost independently of each side. The question is how do you connect the two? And there's in that one diagram that I showed about connectivity. Actually, through the metro, there is connectivity. You can actually go up the escalator on the north side, get onto the platform, and then get up onto this area too. Obviously, you have to pay. You have to have the card and so forth. But there is an option in which you can get from one side to the other using metro, and certainly from an accessibility standpoint, they have elevators and escalators that can manage that. I don't anticipate anyone kind of being in this light green area. Again, it's just the edge of garage. It's the back of these homes. There's not a whole lot of eyes on the streets from a safety standpoint. It's a little problematic. So, our goal has always been to stick to streets and park edges for that connectivity, because mainly from a safety standpoint. We certainly want eyes on the street and the ability for pedestrians to feel safe against a building.
And there, in answer to your first question, I believe, I know we sent our presentation to Graham, and I assume that Aaron can post it along with theirs.
Right.
Certainly.
And I would just
Okay.
probably speaking out of turn here, Mary, but I would also mention that we want to have a more focused discussion regarding connectivity, specifically pedestrian and bicycle connectivity at a subsequent meeting. So, that comment is very much a thing of study right now. So I appreciate that, and we'll be bringing that up to the task force soon.
Okay, Ellen.
Okay, I have a couple of concerns, and I'm with Tim. I am worried about affordability here, and we have kind of a glut of $3,000, $3,500 small apartments out there for rent, and we aren't really creating more units to be owned. So that's one concern. The plan that shows the high rises and 18 stories along Huntington Avenue, I wish you luck dealing with the Huntington Civic Association on that one. But it's backing onto Biscayne Drive that will absolutely dwarf the people who own their homes there. And there's some people who have paid major dollars for them. I mean, they're going in $400,000 and $500,000 now. And then to be drowned out by an 18-story high-rise, I think, is unacceptable. And then my other concern regarding especially high-rises is I'm sure you're aware that there are some 2-story townhouses that in the past have gone sliding into the street or just their front yards because of the marine clay problem there. So I'm sure you've got engineers who have looked into it, but we've had high rises in this area that have, sunk a few inches and torqued, and it's a problem.
Thank you for your comments. We are concerned about the transition to Biscayne, and which is why we have suggested townhouses there, because we think it's maybe more compatible. You give up some density, but it is more compatible. And yes, the marine clay is a problem. It requires major engineering, which adds significant cost. It can be engineered and needs to be engineered. It's principally on this plan impacting what we're calling S3, that high rise. And that will require significant engineering. It will indeed add to the cost. The other buildings are, for the most part, up on the flatter parts of the ground or down on the flatter parts of the ground. But even there, I'm sure there'll be a full special structures geotechnical study that the county will require and that we'll have to work with.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. And I'm sure, everyone would like to hear more about that. It's just, I hope that when you do this, you will take into consideration when doing this kind of stuff, and there are vibrations in one section down the road, it can cause major problems to homes and apartment buildings that are already built.
Okay.
So, and I just think 18 stories is too high along Huntington. That's my personal opinion.
Aaron, do we have with the task force, no other questions to open it up for the public? See if there are any comments.
Yes,
or
I don't see
questions.
any other task force members with their hands raised, so. Is there anyone from the public? I don't see any hands raised from the public either.
One person just raised their hand. I
Okay.
couldn't see who it was.
Okay, Sonia Brehe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been listening in and I appreciate all of the discussion. I just felt like I had the opportunity to say hello and to acknowledge, you know, there's a lot of opportunity here. I'm Sonia Brehe. I'm with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. And I think, you know, a lot of the discussion around the land uses has been very helpful. I was going to share that, you know, I really appreciate Graham's presentation because it really provided real TOD examples that are happening in the county, and quite frankly have cited some of my favorite places. Avenir Place and Dunloring, the Dunloring TOD are great. You know, having Harris Teeter and several restaurants, you know, that are at ground level along with the housing have really offered some vibrancy. It's, you know, it's a small localized area, you know, and I was going to cite Caboose, which is a great small local business, and Mosaic has clearly been very successful, but that seems a caliber beyond what we're looking at here. But clearly, you need to get these mixes right. The Vienna Metro has had its challenges. You know, there is no anchor. There's not a lot of street-facing retail, and services are lacking. And, you know, so folks still need to drive to get to nearby grocery stores and other services. So figuring out how to sort of tap into and create that right balance of mixes will really obviously be critical. I was sort of intrigued by this idea about that a lot of the retail at the Huntington Metro would be more community-based services and not necessarily a destination, which is some of these other examples that we were just citing. Yet we would still need to ensure parking for these retail establishments. So like if people live there and they're walking there and there's Metro there, is it possible for the county to rethink what the requirements are for parking so that we can really focus more on getting that mix of uses right? You know, if it's going to be serving the folks that are within a walkable, bikeable Metro ride, I think we won't need as much parking, and this site is already laden with parking. So rethinking the parking and figuring out how to use that space in a better way will be really helpful. But it sounds really promising. There's a lot of opportunity, and I agree about the affordable housing and making sure that there's housing that is provided at a mix of income levels will be really critical to ensure the vibrancy here. So anyway, I think it's been a great discussion. I appreciate the presentations, and I just wanted to sort of give my 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
And it looks like Mark Yanni has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to kind of reinforce what we're talking about. You know, when we're looking at this site, we've got, just to clarify again, you've essentially got the north side and the south side. And in between that, you have essentially just infrastructure and unbuildable land. You know, when we're talking about retail, you know, I think it's important to remember, you know, on the south side's already adequately kind of served by Dewascan. We already have those challenges with the retail site. And you know, you have a big site literally right across the street. Yeah, you can have some retail within those buildings. You know, really meaningful retail that helps kind of dialogue between that and the properties across the street is going to happen at the Dewascan site. But on the north side, also, I think it's important to remember, and we haven't seen that referenced in any of these proposals yet so far, is we have Land Bay T. Land Bay T is just to the east of this on Huntington, you know, where the Wesley Housing Project is. And that's an area in the Huntington Conservation Area that's reserved for more multifamily housing, but it's also reserved for another 20,000 square feet of office space. I mean, not office, but retail space. that's where you currently have retail right now. And there are people, I understand, when talking to the Huntington folks, that someone seems to be assembling that area there too. But you're going to have retail in the area right there, and the ability to go up with retail there. So it does come a question as to how much you can actually put here to remain viable, and then the threat of having vacant space. You know, maybe it's not resident retail, maybe it's non-residential of some sort of capacity. You want to maybe give yourself that necessary flexibility. And also, just to reinforce, I think Ellen's excellent point about, the compatibility with Huntington Civic, particularly with regard to initially N3, where we had proposed townhomes. We thought townhomes backing up to townhomes was a better way to kind of dialogue and transition in from the Huntington Civic folks. So those are just a couple points I wanted to raise before we close up for the day.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, I don't see anyone else with their hand raised.
Okay. Well, if no other comments, again, want to thank the excellent presentation from Miguel and Graham, and thank you to staff, everyone that's participated and helped put this together. I know we've gone over a little bit on time, but we covered a lot of great information, and I think it's going to continue to help us to move forward with the project. And Neil, at least you have RDI and the Huntington Club to kind of look toward.
Yeah, they
see how that goes. And
I sent them a congratulations note the next day saying, you did it.
Right. So there should be some great lessons learned there, and I hope that you all continue the dialogue and the coordination between the two projects. So
we talk to them regularly,
really
and they're certainly ahead of us, and I certainly hope we don't catch up with them, but we're trying our best.
Very great. Okay. Well, thank you. So our next task force meeting is meeting number 9, which is scheduled for January the 11th, into the new year. Man, can you believe that, right? And we'll be talking more Metro Station Transportation Project number 2. So continue to look out for information from staff. I want to give a quick note and comment to say I got an opportunity to meet Hillary Clausen last week at Senator Servill's breakfast, and so that was a pleasure to meet her in person, because we've been meeting through Zoom or through the computers, so it was great to meet some of you in person. So Hillary, it was great to see you, and thanks for introducing yourself. That was awesome. So if there's nothing else for the good of the group, I would like to say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone, and may you have a safe and wonderful holiday season, and we see all each other either before the new year or we'll see you in the new year. So that's it. I'll
Thank you very much.
off, and
Okay, thanks everyone.
and good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay.